Hey, what's up, dude? So the other day I uploaded a video criticizing Greg Doucette. Maybe about 3 or 4 of you noticed because for some reason YouTube didn't bother giving out notifications. But anyway, in that video I basically went over why Greg Doucette is wrong about auto-regulation methods like RPE or RIR, reps in reserve, and why he's wrong about his recommendations to frequently try to train to failure. And in that video, I also challenged him to a debate, which will become an important piece of information in just a moment. If Greg has any problem with what I've said, I'd be more than happy to debate him. I've challenged Greg Doucette multiple times to a debate on RIR, RPE, these auto-regulation techniques, and I guess Greg felt that I didn't embarrass him enough in my video, so he decided to embarrass himself further in my comment section. And I noticed that when I was reading this comment, I was actually reading it in Greg's really whiny, nasally voice where he's like screaming at you. And since people in my last video said I did a pretty good impression of Greg Doucette, I guess I'll read this out in Greg Doucette's voice.
You need to watch more of my vids since you are training harder than last time, as evidenced by adding weight to the bar for the same reps.
I don't know, if you think I have a good Greg Doucette impression, leave a like on this video. But anyway, Greg Doucette is a weaselly, dishonest liar, so what he's trying to do with this comment is muddy the waters, deliberately confuse people, and he's even trying to change the argument into an entirely different topic. So he's claiming that because I add weight as the weeks go on in my training, because my training gets progressively more difficult, that means I agree with his training principles where he always says, you know, train harder than last time, training has to get progressively more difficult. Well, that's not the argument we're having. We both agree that you need to incorporate progressive overload into your training. If you don't have progressive overload incorporated into your training, then you're not going to make any gains. So this argument was never about the utility of progressive overload. That's something we already agree on. The argument was about auto-regulation techniques like RPE or RIR, the utility of training to failure, the importance of fatigue management, and how close to failure you need to take each set to get a stimulus from training. So Greg is basically trying to change the argument from like RPE, the utility of training to failure, to the utility of progressive overload, which is something we already agree on, and he's trying to confuse his audience into thinking this was always about progressive overload and try to fool people into thinking that, oh, Vegan Gains agrees with me, so, you know, he's just talking nonsense. It's just incredibly dishonest. And this is a common manipulation tactic that Greg Doucette uses to confuse and manipulate his audience. He will misquote people, take them out of context, lie about what they said, and then he'll claim that, oh, see, they agree with me. I was right this whole time. Greg will just use these sorts of lies to make it seem as though he's winning an argument. So here's an example of this. Here's a clip of Greg Doucette claiming that sports physiology PhD Mike Israetel agrees with him on training to failure. Greg claims that Mike Israetel agrees that training to failure and beyond is best for hypertrophy, muscle growth.
They then say how I mentioned that I often train beyond failure. And then he asks to Mike, is that a good idea? And his response is, yeah, it probably causes the most muscle growth. He agrees with me. I'm telling you he agrees. Mike agrees with basically everything I say.
So Greg Doucette and Mike Israetel got into an argument about the utility of training to failure. Greg Doucette said training to failure is best for muscle growth. Mike Israetel said you kind of want to avoid training to failure and use it sparingly. But then Greg Doucette tried to claim, oh, Mike agrees with me, and what he did was he misquoted him and deliberately took him out of context. So what Mike Israetel actually said was that sure, for one single session, training to failure or beyond failure will probably generate more muscle growth, but over the long term, over several weeks or months of training, no, training like that won't generate as much muscle growth because it will generate a ton of fatigue and you're just going to end up burning out from training. So here's the actual clip of what Mike really said.
Greg advocates training above failure, as he said, using partial reps, slow eccentrics, drop sets, and so on. All this to increase intensity.
I usually train 5 reps above failure. Half the sets I do, I can't do another rep, then I'll do 5 partial reps or half reps, or I'll do a slow eccentric, or I'll cheat the weight, or I'll do a drop set. I'm trying to increase my intensity. That is what I advocate. None of this volume bull poop.
Is that a good idea, Mike?
Yeah, like in a single session, it would probably cause the most growth possible. But again, the stimulus to fatigue ratio of stuff like that just turns out to be not so great. So, training beyond failure is even more fatiguing than training to failure. But I think it has a continual linear increase in gains, but an exponential increase in fatigue. It's not something you can sustain a ton. I honestly think that, a lot of professional bodybuilders train with very low frequencies, just one time a week per muscle group. And I think some of that might be pretty close to optimal, but a little bit of ways. And I think they could get closer to optimal if they stopped training so hard every session and just did more sessions per week. Some of that's too much volume, and some of that is going all the way to all-out failure. I actually think the number one reason people train all the way to all-out failure has nothing to do with science or physiology. It has to do with just being egotistical and being masculine, which is sweet. It's cool as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. Like, I just want to just spill my guts here. And like, yeah, it's sweet. Let's something to that. It feels, I would say, cathartic, right? It's like, oh, wow, like I really poured my heart out. It feels sort of therapeutic. But you don't really go to the gym. I mean, if you go to the gym for therapy, that's super cool. It's a cool side benefit, but don't delude yourself that you're going there for hypertrophy. You go there for hypertrophy, you train like a machine. You train like a logician would train, and the way you train like that is to think things through a whole lot. And if the stimulus to fatigue ratio doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter how training to failure makes you feel. Don't go to failure all the time. So that's what I would say there.
So isn't that funny? The YouTube fitness expert who claims to be right 99.7% of the time has to deliberately lie, deliberately misquote people and take them out of context because you're too embarrassed to admit that you're wrong sometimes on certain topics. So hate to be the one to break it to you, Greg, but you're wrong about RIR, RPE, these autoregulation methods. You're wrong about training to failure. And whether you can handle that or not, whether your ego can handle it, that doesn't matter because you can't get away with lying like this anymore. So I think it's just time to give it up and admit you were wrong. And the stupidity continues. So my throat's kind of sore. I'm not going to do the Greg Doucette voice anymore. Also, I do not tell everyone to go to failure on every set. In fact, I warn beginners and people getting back into training to not go to failure. So this is just another bullshit lie from Greg Doucette. This is something that he frequently does. He'll make outrageous, ridiculous claims. Then when he gets criticized for saying something so stupid, he'll walk back his claims and then deny that he ever said it in the first place. So now he's claiming that, oh, I don't always recommend, training to failure all the time, especially for beginner lifters. I always say, if you're a beginner, no, don't train to failure. No, that's a lie. He used to actually tell beginners, always train to failure. He made a video a while ago where he said back when he was a beginner, he'd always train to failure. He'd always go all out, and that's how he recommends beginners train. He said that he says he always tells his clients, always have 0 reps in reserve, always train to failure. Here's the clip of him saying that.
Oh, but I'm natural. I can't train hard because I might be sore. I'm natural. I can't do it. Greg, you're on that there test stuff. You're on creatine. Me, crybaby. Frig off. Just shut up, you natural pussies. I train natural longer than 99% of you. How did I train when I grew up? A lot of people ask me. I went all out, harder, all out. Squats, 425 for 10. I'm going for 11. If I can get 11, I'm going for 12. Half the time I couldn't even put the weight back on the rack because I go all out. That's how you train. This is what I tell everyone. This is how you know you're training hard. For $1,000 per rep, how many more reps would you get? They're usually, my clients will answer, I don't know, like 2 or 3 more. I'm like, it wasn't all out then. How hard was it? Oh man, it was hard. For $1,000 a rep, how many could you have gotten more? Well, probably 2 or 3, 5, I don't know, for $1,000. It should be 0. You should be training on every hard set as if you're being paid to go all out. That's how you train.
Oh, yeah, I bet this is a really tough day for you, huh, Greg? Because now you can't get away with your lies anymore. So let the record show that Greg Doucette is completely full of shit. He has, in fact, instructed beginner lifters to train all out to failure every training session, and you've only walked back your claims after everyone has pointed out to you how stupid that advice is. And now Greg is actually admitting that, yeah, beginners shouldn't train to failure. Well, Greg, if you're going to admit that beginners shouldn't train to failure, shouldn't they learn how to approximate how close they are to failure using a system like RPE or RIR? Huh, weird. It's almost as if you're agreeing with me now, huh, Greg? And this idea that only beginners should be doing this, only beginners should be incorporating some sort of auto-regulation technique like RPE or RIR is just stupid, because advanced lifters get much more fatigue from their training and much less stimulus. So it's even more important, the more advanced you become, to know how to approximate failure and avoid failure, and to, use these auto-regulation techniques like RP and RIR to maximize stimulus and minimize fatigue so you can make consistent progress even as you get more advanced. And then Greg advised me to buy his training book. How about this? If I can get 10,000 likes on this video, I will buy Greg Doucette's training book, and I'll do a review on it, and I'll do an honest review. If it actually has good information, I'll, give credit where credit's due, but if it's a terrible book, I'll just review it fairly. And then Greg said, oh, and asked Charles Poliquin about the 10% rule. So this requires some context. In my last video, I criticized Greg Doucette's 10% rule. So this came up during his debate with Mike Israetel, where Greg Doucette claimed that if you have a 10% reduction in strength on a given exercise, then you should stop performing that exercise. You shouldn't do any more sets. Well, in that debate, Greg admitted that he has no justification for giving that advice.
And how do you know that that rule applies to hypertrophy training?
Well, we don't technically know anything applies to anything, really. But, I don't know what you want me to say. How do we know? We don't know anything. How do we know that 3 sets is a good amount of sets? How do I know that 8 sets?
We can measure it in the laboratory.
Volume?
So they've done a bunch of studies on various numbers of sets, and they actually measure hypertrophy directly and how much muscle people gain off a variety of instruments. And they can also measure how much upregulation of various hypertrophic pathways occurs directly after numerous sessions. So we do know some things better than we know others. I'm just curious about the 10% rule and if that's been validated at all or suggested in hypertrophy training versus other sports.
So Greg Doucette just absolutely embarrassed himself in that debate. He admitted that he's using this arbitrary 10% rule, even though it's not evidence-based, even though there's no reason to believe that it's, beneficial or effective in any way for hypertrophy training. And he was so embarrassed afterwards that he actually made a follow-up video trying to justify this bad advice, and he just cherry-picked some sort of authority figure who sort of agreed with him.
And I brought up this 10% rule that, reference it, Greg. And I don't remember the reference because I read it 20 years ago. Sorry, I don't have a photographic memory like my twin. I don't remember the exact name. And I'm doing a debate, and I'm on the beach in Mexico, and I'm not sitting there, I'm gonna memorize this study and try to make Mike look like an idiot. No, I'm doing an interview so that I can educate a population of people on what he thinks and I think, and we can go back and forth and share our different opinions. But Mike only cares about making me look like an idiot.
So notice the subtle lie here. When Greg Doucette was debating Mike Israetel, he flat out admitted that he had no research supporting his 10% rule advice. He just admitted he came up with it pretty much arbitrarily, and there's no evidence supporting it whatsoever. But now, after the debate happens, he's claiming, oh, well, no, I know there's research supporting it. I just didn't have it on hand because, I was on Mexico on vacation, and what do you expect me to do? Do a bunch of research when I'm on vacation, just trying to have fun?
And how do you know that that rule applies to hypertrophy training?
Well, we don't technically know anything applies to anything, really.
And I brought up this 10% rule that, reference it, Greg. And I don't remember the reference because I read it 20 years ago.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying?
And notice how damaged Greg Doucette's ego is just because he lost this debate. Greg accused Mike Israetel of trying to make him look stupid. Oh my god, I can't believe he did that. Just because Mike Israetel was able to prove him wrong in a debate. This guy has such an insanely inflated ego, and it's no wonder that he comes up with all of these lies and manipulation tactics, deliberately tries to confuse and mislead his audience. It's because the guy, his ego just cannot handle being wrong.
Mike is like, Greg is such an idiot. He quotes this made-up thing about this 10% rule. What is that? Well, it's not like Charles Poliquin had created this thing back in the day and talk about a 10% critical drop-off point where if you can't perform 10% of the strength, then it's too much and you've lost enough strength, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into it too much. Then what? Yesterday, Jeff Cavalier uses the same freaking 10% rule that I used in my video.
If I drop the weight, let's say 10 or 15%, so 150 down to 135 or 130 or so, and I can't do that for the same number of reps after that same minute and a half or 2 minutes, again, there's a red flag for me there that I'm not really recovering very well.
Jeff Cavalier, 8 million followers. Smart guy.
Okay, so I have two main things to point out here. So Greg is trying to give credibility to his 10% rule, this rule where if you have a 10% drop-off in strength on a given exercise, on the next set, you should stop performing that exercise and just move to a different exercise. So Greg is claiming because he found two authority figures, two people who he thinks are authority figures, Charles Poliquin and Athlean X, because they agree with him, that means his 10% rule is legitimate or it has credibility. It's useful for hypertrophy training. Well, Greg, that is an appeal to authority. It's an informal logical fallacy. So no, if you want to give credibility to this 10% rule, you have to provide research, studies, showing that it's useful for hypertrophy training. Just because you can find two people who agree with you, that doesn't provide any evidence for your claims. And I also want to point out, Athlean X and Charles Poliquin are absolute morons. I'd say especially Athlean X. The guy doesn't know anything about training. So I don't know why you'd rely on these authority figures. It's just a joke. It shows how much you know. And I also want to point out, again, unsurprisingly, Greg Doucette lied. He took Athlean X out of context and lied about what he said. Athlean X does not agree with Greg Doucette's 10% rule. Greg just took that clip out of context to make it seem as though Athlean X was saying something completely different. So Greg actually took this clip out of context. It was a video titled 5 Red Flags You're Not Gaining Muscle. That's the video that Athlean X made. In that video, he actually talked about having a significant drop-off in strength from set to set being an indicator of under-recovering in your training. So Athlean X wasn't actually recommending that if you have a 10% drop-off in strength from one set to another, you stop doing that exercise. He was saying you have to make some sort of adjustment to your training, maybe your diet, other things to make sure you're recovering properly. So he was using a drop-off in strength from set to set as an indicator of under-recovery. He wasn't making any recommendation as to, when you should stop performing an exercise. And I'll play a short clip of this, the part that Greg Doucette cut out.
If I drop the weight, let's say 10 or 15%, so 150 down to 135 or 130 or so, and I can't do that for the same number of reps after that same minute and a half or 2 minutes, again, there's a red flag for me there that I'm not really recovering very well, not just from the first set, but on the bigger scheme, sort of in the bigger picture, probably from the last workout. And again, as I stated in the last point, under recovery is going to be the biggest enemy for the natural lifter for trying to get back and build muscle from workout to workout, from session to session, and keep those gains coming. Look at how you're performing from one set to the next as an indicator of that, and be honest about it, and be willing to make the change if need be.
So isn't that pathetic? After Greg Doucette lost the debate with Mike Israetel and he was proven wrong about his 10% rule, his ego couldn't handle it, he felt like he was made a fool of, he felt stupid, so he decided to try to make himself feel better by taking an Athlean X clip out of context and lying about what he said to make it look as if Athlean X agrees with him. So other experts in the fitness industry agree with Greg Doucette. Well, Athlean X never agreed with you. He never said he agreed with your 10% rule. He never said that if you have a 10% drop off in strength from one set to another, you have to stop doing that exercise like you say. No, Athlean X just made a video talking about how if you see big drop-offs in strength from set to set, that means that's an indicator that you're overly fatigued, you're not recovering well from training, and either you have to get better sleep, eat better, do things like that to help with recovery, or make overarching changes in your training to make sure you're not overly fatigued by the time you do your next training session. So Greg, you are a liar, you're a joke to me. I hope from now on everyone sees you as a joke and a liar. You shouldn't be taken seriously because you say absolutely stupid things. You will not ever admit you are wrong about those stupid things, and you just come up with these ridiculous lies because you think you can get away with it. You think no one would actually spend the hours that I put into this doing research to prove that you're lying. Well, guess what, Greg? I have fully weaponized autism and I am not afraid to use it. So I don't know what else to say to you, dude. Again, the debate offer's on the table, but I know you're not going to agree to debate me. In your comment here, you never showed any interest in debating me, and it's clear why. It's because you know you're wrong, you know you're stupid, you know I'm smarter than you, and you know I would make you look like an absolute idiot, just like Mike Israetel made you look like an idiot about a year ago. And if you like this video, maybe consider supporting me on Patreon or through my website. I have some funding perks you may find interesting. If you're looking for clothing, then check out the Vegan Gain store. And if you're looking for vegan pet food, then check out Vigor. They have a wide selection of vegan cat and dog food. And if you click the link in the description and use the discount code, you can get 10% off of any order. And if you're looking for online coaching, then check out Quality Gains. He offers customized meal and training programs. And if you click the link in the description, you can get a free ebook. And of course, check out my wife on OnlyFans. She does full nude. She's hot as hell. So if you're into that sort of thing, check out her OnlyFans. And of course, check out my OnlyFans. So if you want to see me naked, see my pee-pee, check out my OnlyFans. And as always, keep making those vegan, and Greg Doucette is a liar gains.
What a relief. When will this poisonous product cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. Let us begin now with the cow. The way it gets to your plate and how.